I wanted to talk to you today about Schefflera, which are a new genus of evergreen, tall-growing shrubs or small trees, which have recently become big additions to the Bernkoos Nurseries catalogue. And the one we're standing under is Schefflera taiwaniana. 25 years ago, I first saw these Scheffleras growing at Caerhays gardens and at Tragrain gardens, and I wasn't terribly taken with them. Since then I realized I was completely wrong, and that they're a genus with a lot of potential in our woodland gardens, or indeed any other garden where there's a bit of room. I mean, the leaves, these evergreen leaves, are really very graceful. This is about a 15-year-old tree. And if we come back, you can see that right at the top of it, it's just setting quite a good crop of seeds. Now we're going to look at a whole range of 4 or 5 different species of Schefflera today. They're an interesting genus in that some of them flower in the summer and set seed quite early in the autumn, and others flower November, December and actually set seed almost immediately. So you have quite a range of flowering times, and a range of seeding times, and a range of foliage and the way in which it appears. These are very architectural and ornamental plants, and Schefflera taiwaniana, which we're looking at now, is probably the hardiest of the species as far as we yet know. This only came into the country in the 1990s, and Edward Needham from Tragrain Gardens was the person who first brought this beautiful plant into Western Europe and into Cornwall. And nobody quite knew then whether something Taiwanese would stand the test of time. But these plants were largely collected at quite high altitudes, and therefore they're quite used to colder winters. It also grows down at low sea level and just above sea level in Taiwan, and those plants in much hotter, warmer winters would probably not be suitable for growing even in Cornish gardens. But once you get up to a higher altitude, they most definitely are. And if you're going to try one Schefflera as your first trial into this interesting genus, Schefflera taiwaniana would, I think, be one to try, and we've got very good stocks of this plant. Another much sought after species of Schefflera is Schefflera macrophylla, and it takes its name because of the gigantic leaves which it has, and in many ways it's one of the most beautiful species, as it has this extraordinary new growth and sort of reddish orangey indumentum on the new growth leaves and on the stems. We had a 12 or 14 foot plant of this species which unfortunately blew over, and despite us cutting it back and staking it up again, it didn't reshoot. But we do have a mature tree in another garden which is setting seed, and we very much hope that in 18 months time, when their seedlings develop, we'll be able to add this to the catalogue. I suspect it'll be one of the very best sellers of all the Schefflera species. We cut a branch and put it on our Chelsea stand in 2019, and a lot of people were very taken with that as an ornamental plant for the garden. We've seen no signs of it not being perfectly hardy as yet, but obviously these gigantic leaves mean that you need to plant it in a pretty sheltered space. Otherwise it's prone to blowing over, as ours did, even in the most sheltered space we could find. This is Schefflera pauciflora, and it comes in quite a range of forms with different leaf sizes. Some of our plants have just got one single straight stem, and some are a bit more branched, as you see here. The flower trusses are long over and the seeds are setting quite nicely. They are not quite ripe yet, and they will turn jet black when they are. They don't all turn jet black at once, but as soon as they're black, they drop very quickly. So you have to be on your toes to collect the seed, and we found that if you collect the whole seed head like that, and some are ripe and some aren't, the ones that aren't ripe won't germinate. Schefflera seed, when they're ripe in late October, November, need to be sown right away with a bit of bottom heat to get them to germinate and to hold them through the winter. We found that that's better than sowing them in the spring. But again, you've got a most intricate and complex leaf structure. You know, some of these leaves have 5 leaflets and some only have 3. An attractive ornamental plant again. This is another of our Schefflera paucifloras, and unlike the one we were just looking at a moment ago, this one has a straight stem and is about 18 years old. You can see some seed heads tucked away in the top of it. You can see that it has rather a smaller leaf formation than the one we were looking at as well, and Schefflera pauciflora is quite variable. The other great attribute a single stem has is that it produces these nice little offshoots which make absolutely perfect cuttings for propagating in the mist house. There were a lot more of these offshoots, but they've disappeared into the propagation bench. Not the greatest flower, interesting seed, interesting ornamental plant. You can begin to see how big these small trees are going to grow, and of course, being evergreen, they do stand out well in the winter. So this is the rather impressive Schefflera delavayi, which has been growing here for about 6 or 8 years, and you can see that it's got all massive flower heads, and these flowers won't be out for another month or so yet, and they will be a nice display of tiny white flowers, and the seed will set very quickly on them. Again, you see we've got a beautiful rusty coloured indumentum on the stems and on the new growth. We've got a gigantic leaf structure, perhaps not quite as big as Schefflera macrophylla, but certainly a whopping great ornamental plant species if ever I've seen one. Schefflera delavayi only started setting seed with us about a year ago, so we have yet to get decent established plants of this, but I'm sure it's going to be an absolute hit when we do with our customers. It's a plant that comes from both China and northern Vietnam. Again, I can see nothing in the reference books to suggest that it's not hardy. Again, it only appeared in the UK at Caerhays garden in the 1990s, and there are very few mature plants around as yet, but here it's been through a moderately cold winter or two, and it's certainly been through the beast from the east in March 1918, and it didn't turn a hair at that. Quite how much space it's going to take up eventually if it continues to spread, I've absolutely no idea. Your guess may be as good as mine. But it's certainly a gigantic and impressive species, and far and away the biggest flower heads of any of the species we've seen. Quite odd in December and November to see a plant flowering quite as well as this in the garden. And this is Schefflera rhododendrifolia, which is also quite distinct and peculiar in its habit. This has only been in the ground here 4 or 5 years, and you can see how extraordinarily vigorous it's been and how thick and chubby the main stem is. a very attractive leaf and stem coloration, and although you can't see it now, there is wonderful indumentum on the new growth. This hasn't turned a hair in the drought. We've yet to see it flower, but what we do know is that, again, this plant came into Cornwall via Edward Needham and Treguy and Tregrain in the 1990s. Krug Farm nurseries have made some introductions of it as well, which, as you'd expect, are a little bit variable. But at Tregrain and Treguy, this plant was recorded as 9 meters tall by 2013. So I think we might have got this one in the right place, because it looks like going straight up, unlike Schefflera delavayi, which is threatening to be a spreader. So we're really talking here about a serious tree, a serious ornamental tree, which, you know, it's astonishing that a whole genus of plants with the beauty and variety of Schefflera have really only been in this country for 30 years. And I'm sure they're going to catch on with everybody, and I'm sure that we're all going to become collectors. Even though I was a very reluctant collector myself to start with, I think I've now got the bug and I'm easily persuaded. And I know that there's loads more species which are coming into the country, which are interesting and which we're trialling, but they're not big enough really to include in this article yet, or to be available for sale from the nursery. It's a slow process propagating these plants, but I think we're in for a treat when they're in all our gardens.